Amal Unbound by Aisha Said, Chapter 9, read for you by Mrs. Shoemaker. The girls were busy watching television, and Seema and I were getting settled at the table to go over her notes for the day's geography lesson, when my mother's friends knocked at the door. "I come bearing ladus this time," Fazia said, stepping inside with Miriam. "Is your mother up for visitors now?" "She's still not feeling well." "Now, this is too much. She has to start meeting people eventually," Fazia said. Fazia was right. Something had to be done to snap her out of this fog. Maybe visitors would help. I stepped inside my mother's room. "Amma," I said, "Fazia and Miriam Auntie are here to see you and the baby." "This isn't a good time." Her voice was dull. Even though the room was dim, I could still make out the circles under her eyes etched so deep. I wondered if time would ever erase them. Lubna lay swaddled tightly, fast asleep. That's what I was calling the new baby, though it wasn't officially her name. My mother didn't name us until we were a year old, and she knew we would survive. I picked her up and cradled her in my arms. "They only want to say hello. I'll straighten up the room a little and tell them to come in." "I'm sorry." She reached out and stroked my arm. "I'm foggy lately. I'll shake it off soon." "I know you will," I managed to say. Her gold bangles from her wedding dowry, the ones she never removed because they were her most valuable possessions, clinked against her arms when she touched me. Her frame seemed smaller than it did a few weeks ago. I drew open the curtains and pulled away the handful of clothes scattered on the floor. "You can come in now," I told her friends. I took my time making chai and arranging a plate of biscuits on a wooden tray. By the time I carried the tray into my parents' bedroom, I was surprised to see my mother sitting up and chatting. "It's devastating," Fazia was saying. "I've been there myself, you know." "I'm not sure how one even recovers, or if you even can," my mother responded. I stared at my mother. It was one thing to feel this way when my baby sister was born, but to still think it now? "Munera can't possibly recover. He burned their orange groves to a charred crisp," Fazia continued. "I heard it was her children playing with matches in the field," Miriam said. "Yes, of course you heard that. Who would dare accuse him openly? Mark my words, one day he's going to hurt the wrong person," Fazia said. "These things catch up with you." "He runs this town. Men like him suffer no consequences," my mother said. My hands unclenched. It was the Khan family they were talking about. "Never thought I'd say this, but it was better when his father was running the town," Fazia said. "Sure, Khan Sahib threatened all sorts of things, but never. Did he ever do them? To teach a lesson here and there, yes, but his son Jawad? Ever since he took charge, things are out of control. I really think he enjoys punishing people." "Owe him nothing, and he cannot harm you," my mother replied. "Except everyone does," Miriam said. "We need his filthy money. Maybe if we all united against him, something could be done. It's happening more and more these days. People are banding together and overthrowing their landlords. Read about it in the paper all the time. The Khan family would never let that happen here. Remember Hazarabad?" Fazia asked. "The people in that town made a pact. Refused to pay their debts until he stopped with the threats. Forget Munera's measly acres. He destroyed their entire village. Every last orange grove and cotton field. Jawad Sahib sent quite the message." My mother lifted the teacup from the ground and brought it to her lips. She took a sip. "I'm thankful we're on the other end of the village, far away from him," she said. I gathered their empty teacups. I didn't really care about Jawad Sahib and his acts of vengeance. My mother could have been discussing the devil himself for all it mattered. I was just glad to see my mother drink her tea. It had to be a sign. I stepped into the kitchen as my father came home. He slipped off his shoes on the woven mat by the front door. "Fazia and Mariam Auntie are in with Amma right now," I told him excitedly. "She's drinking chai and talking. She even smiled." "Good," my father said. "Maybe she's starting to get better." Why didn't I push her to meet her friends sooner? I went into my bedroom and ran my hand over my uniform hanging in the closet. It was starched and ready. Maybe in a few days I could wear it again. "Amal," my father said. He watched me from the doorway. "I didn't mean to get your hopes up. Drinking up a cup of tea is nice, but it's still going to take time for her to fully recover and be up and running the house again." "But maybe—" "No, Amal. I'm sorry, but it has to be this way." But did it really have to be this way? If I were a boy, would I be staying home to fold laundry and iron clothes? If I were a son, would he so casually tell me to forget my dreams? I rushed outside and sank onto the front steps. My mother was adamant about our education. If only she could get better, everything would go back to normal. "Look who it is!" Hafsa pedaled up to me on her younger brother's bicycle. She dug her sandals into the ground, slowing it to a halt. "Do your parents know you're riding a bicycle again?" I asked her. Most people around here frowned upon girls riding bicycles, and Hafsa's parents had let her know they were one of them. "If my brothers can ride a bike, then I can too," she said. "Besides, maybe I'll be the next Zenith Irfan and bike across the country." "That was a motorcycle," I reminded her. "Same difference." The voices of children playing cricket in a nearby open field floated over to us. "How's Seema as a teacher?" she asked. The power's gone straight to her head. I let out a small laugh. She won't even repeat the questions on the spelling test, no matter how much I beg. "Sounds like Seema," Hafsa smiled. "How's Miss Sadia?" I asked her. "Ever get her that bell?" "Huh! I wish. She asks about you every single day, though." Hafsa rolled her eyes. "If we thought you were her favorite before, we definitely know now." "Well, you can become her new favorite," I swallowed. My father doesn't seem like he'll be letting me go back to school anytime soon. "No way! You better be back. We're going to college, remember? I'm not rooming with a total stranger." "Let's hope he changes his mind then." "Hope?" Hafsa frowned. "You think my dad doesn't grumble about all the money my books and uniform cost him? But we know it's less of a headache to send me to school than to keep me home." "You can't just hope, Amal. You have to keep at him, and don't take no for an answer." After Hafsa left, I thought about what she had said. Maybe she was right. I had to come up with some kind of plan. But I also knew no plan would work if my mother wasn't better. Chapter 10. The lights flickered off again the next afternoon. The overhead fan slowed to a halt. Another blackout. My forehead trickled with sweat. Seema was back from school and doing her best to corral Safa and Rabia, whose shouts echoed off the concrete floor, hammering into my brain. It turned out my father was right about yesterday. The cup of tea with Fazia and Miriam wasn't any sort of magic cure. As usual, my mother spent the morning with the curtains drawn. She barely spoke a word when I went inside to check on her. She wasn't on the mend. Maybe she never would be. I had to get out for a little while. I counted the money I needed for the market. Seema's back was turned to me. "Get your hands out of the flour," she yelled at the powder-white Safa. "I'll get her," I wanted to say, but the words never left my mouth. I was allowed a few moments of peace without any of my sisters yanking at my sleeve, wasn't I? Just this once? I slipped past Seema and out the house. It was only a trip to the market, but I would cherish this time to myself. The sounds of tractors, bicycle bells, and children playing cricket in the streets filled me with a sense of calm. I knew each store owner and vendor I passed. I knew their wives and their children, but today, traveling the same streets I'd walked hundreds of times before, without little hands to keep out of fruit stands, without tiny feet to steer around idling rickshaws, I noticed it all as though for the first time. The sun was hotter than usual for the time of the year, but I even enjoyed this. Shauqut's store was bustling. My neighbors filled the aisles, sifting through the vegetables and fruit. "Why is it so busy today?" I asked my neighbor Balkis. "New arrivals, pomegranates, coconuts, apples," she replied. She waved at the shoppers with one hand and fanned her face with a newspaper with the other. "Needed some turmeric, but I didn't know I'd have to fight these crowds. You'd think Shauqut was giving these things away for free." I squeezed through the aisle. 2 pomegranates rested in the crate, perched next to the onions and apples. Red, sweet, delicious pomegranates. I counted my money. I had enough to buy 1 extra item. Something small, just for me. I snatched up one as a woman grabbed the other. One of my neighbors argued with Shauqut about bruised zucchini and squash. I grabbed a handful of onions and some ginger and leaned past her to pay. Slinging my satchel over my shoulder, I stepped back onto the dusty road. I gripped the red fruit in my palm. Maybe this pomegranate was a sign of hope I needed. A bit of sweetness after all the bitterness. I would share it with Omar and Seema. It didn't make everything better, but the thought made me happy. Even now I can remember how happy I felt in that moment. That moment before my world changed. 1 second I was standing. The next slammed backward onto the ground. A car, black with darkened windows. How did I miss it? How wrapped up in my mind was I not to notice a car? The door opened and footsteps approached. I took in the clean-shaven face, the closely trimmed hair, and the eyes hidden by dark sunglasses. People began to gather by the side of the road. Balkis, Ira, Shauqut, customers from the market. Why didn't any of them help me? Why did they stare at this strange man and say nothing? I stumbled to my feet. My hands were scraped and bloody. My leg throbbed when I put my weight on it, but I could stand. I gritted my teeth and gathered the bruised ginger and onions laying scattered along the road and tossed them in my satchel. "You should pay better attention," the stranger said. I saw his hand reach down and pick up my pomegranate. He stepped closer to me. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Where do you live? I'll take you home." He was smiling. His teeth were so white, the whitest I had ever seen. "I'm fine," I told him. I reached up to adjust my chowdor, cloaking myself from him. I was about to walk away when I realized he was still holding my pomegranate. He followed my gaze. "My mother loves these," he said. "You won't mind if I take this for her, will you? Of course I'll pay you for it, and you can buy more." It was the last one. "Will this do?" He pulled out a handful of money. What was he doing? Did he think I was a beggar? That everything was for sale? My mother's voice told me to let this go. Something was off with this man. Let him have the fruit and walk away. But all I could see was the red pomegranate and how he grasped it in his palm as though it was already his. I thought of my father, who had no time for my dreams, my little sisters, and their endless demands, and suddenly I felt tired of feeling powerless, tired of denying my own needs because someone else needed something more, including this man, this stranger, buying me off, denying me the smallest of pleasures. It's not for sale. So you'll give it without charge? His smirk taunted me. My scraped hands burned. You hit me with your car, and you want to take my things? My voice trembled. I heard it growing louder as if it were coming from someone else. I'm not giving it away. I snatched it from his hand. The crowd murmured. I started walking away. Stop! His voice was so loud it echoed off the buildings. I didn't stop. I walked quickly until I turned the corner toward home, and only then did I break into a run. The farther I ran, the sicker I felt. Who was that man? What exactly had I done?